Hey guys, it's Chris and welcome back to another Writing Wednesday on a Thursday. Anyway, today I want to talk about how to write a novel, kind of a step-by-step guide of, the thought process and maybe the planning if you're more of a plotter type of thing. And then when we get to the actual, step number 5 of writing, we'll go through a basic story structure. Now, there are quite a few narrative structures out there, from the 3-act story to the hero's journey, all that good stuff as well. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to include a basic story structure that all these different narrative structures will include, no matter which one you choose. So anyway, let's jump into it. How to write your novel step by step. Alright, and before we get started, let me just quickly say this video is brought to you by my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and I would like to thank my newest Patreon. Thank you to Joshua. I really appreciate the support, you guys. You guys keep this channel going as we try to figure out this new YouTube algorithm. So anyway, let's jump right in. How to write your novel. Now, keep in mind, these are kind of general steps and general guidelines, and number 1 and 2 could be interchangeable, kind of depending on how you think and what kind of writer you may potentially be. But number 1, the idea. Now, your idea may come from just a thought, it may come from a conversation, it may come from a dream, it may come from, one of those shower thoughts. And you guys know this, when you're taking a shower, you have some of the best thoughts, some of the weirdest thoughts too, actually. And that's also where you think of things that you want to say in a conversation you had 3 fucking hours ago. So anyway, for me in The Crimson Gods, I just had kind of a scene in my head. I just had this, character in this particular, mysterious location. Something happens unexpectedly there, and I didn't know quite sure what that was, but it started to bring up all these nagging questions that I thought, yeah, I think I want to answer these questions, and that became my story. And number 2, again, could be interchangeable with number 1, just depending on how you are personally. Think about your genre. And when I say genre, of course, you want to think about, science fiction. Do I want to write fantasy? Do I want to write romance or mystery or contemporary or whatever it may be? But the point being that all these have general guidelines on word count. So you want to think about that as you're writing your novel. Now, you don't have to stick to any of these rules, but you probably want to stick to these general guidelines about word counts. So a novel technically is considered 40,000 words or more, but honestly, in today's world, a novel's minimum should be at least 50,000 words, but the average novel is about 60 to 100,000 words. Now, the higher end, like 90,000 to 120,000, will typically be fantasy, sci-fi, etc., because of all the world-building elements, and you want to cater to those type of readers as well. So if you're going to write sci-fi or fantasy, for example, you're going to be on the high end of that spectrum, or you generally want to be, because those readers, you do want to cater to your readers. They typically expect to spend more time with a book as opposed to something maybe like young adult. So a genre like young adult would typically be on the lower end of that spectrum, around 50 to 80,000 words. And then, for example, if you're writing some kind of mystery, thriller, suspense, or maybe even horror, those should probably typically be a little bit shorter too, because those are typically faster paced and you want to keep the reader's attention. And just for some reference here about word counts, 40,000 words or below, typically 10 to 40,000 words, that's considered a novella, so you're not quite at the novel length. And again, in today's world, at least 50 to 60,000 words is considered a novel, although technically 40,000 words and above is a novel as far as the definition. If you write a story between 5 and 10,000 words, that is a short story, and if you write a story 500 words or less, that's typically considered flash fiction. So anyway, keep all that in mind, just guidelines, but you probably want to stand by these. Remember, going back to our honest writing advice video, most of us are not going to be the exception to the rule. And step number 3, planning and preparation. Now, of course, this is going to apply to you more if you're the architect or the plotter type as opposed to a pantser or a gardener. But this is where you want to spend some time kind of building your world, outlining your book if you're going to do that. And typically here during this phase, you will know the ending of your story, and then you simply reverse engineer all that and place your characters and your world into that plot to make it work. Now, again, for me with The Crimson Gods, for my personal example, I'm more of a pantser or a gardener, although I do plan some things. So for me, again, I just started writing that scene I talked about, and then I kind of kept going a little bit, and as I started naming places, I started making up places and locations. Then I kind of went and drew a rough sketch of a map and started plotting these places out on the map. And then when I was probably about 4 to 5 chapters in, I kind of figured out my ending as it kind of came to be, as the story kind of developed in my head. Basically a rough outline, very limited bullet points and a simple chapter outline. And that's the method I use. Worked well for me. Again, depending on your style, you may be the type of person who wants to plan out everything meticulously. But remember, that's not a substitute for writing. At some point, you have to write the damn book. You could become really, really good at writing outlines, but if you never actually write the story, then you're not really a writer. So all I'm saying there is don't spend 2 or 3 years, building this world up or whatever without actually writing the damn story. Now, of course, the great thing about planning and stuff like that is if you know some at least basic plot points and you know the ending, then as you're going through and writing your first draft, you can already be writing some of that foreshadowing, placing some of those hints and clues in there about the ending that you already know. As a matter of fact, last week's video was all about foreshadowing, so you can check out that link in the description below, or it will pop up as a card right about here. And step number 4, choose your narrative structure. Now I mentioned this quickly in the beginning of the video, so we'll go a little bit more in depth here in just a second, but this is where you're going to pick, or is it going to be the hero's journey? Is it going to be the basic 3-act story structure? Is it going to be the 5 or 7 point story structure? There are quite a few out there that you can choose from. Pick the one that's best for you, but here in just a second I'll go over a basic story outline that you could also follow as well if you chose to. So we'll go over more details on specific story structures later in another video, but for now, step number 5, write your damn story based off the one you chose. So here's a 5-step example of a basic story structure that all these different story structures will in fact include. Number 1, we have the setup. This is where you're going to introduce your main character. You're going to give the reader a glimpse into their normal lifestyle before things start to change, obviously. For example, if you're writing medieval fantasy, this is where, you show them living in their castle or their hut or whatever they're going to be living in. Maybe he or she likes to walk to the markets every morning. Maybe they are a vendor in the markets, whatever the case may be. Or if you're writing some contemporary romance, maybe your main character is just living in an apartment in a big city. They get up every day and go to work. It's kind of boring. Either way, it's going to be pretty mundane and average no matter what setting it's in because shit's about to change. So on to number 2, the inciting incident. Now essentially the inciting incident, you're going to introduce a problem or conflict that's going to make your MC choose. They can stay in their normal life and perhaps not change anything and maybe even die depending on your story, but they have to make a choice to step out of their comfort zone that will change their life forever. And by the way, when you do this, they can never go back. They can never go back to their normal life. They're changed forever. Whatever your story is, it has to change the character. This is called a character arc. And that's where we get into number 3, rising action. Now this is essentially where you're going to start to beat your characters down to add all this tension to the story so it starts to build in the reader's mind. Now with any narrative structure that you choose, you have to put your MC in shitty situations. Now this could be an injury, this could be a death in the family, this could be heartbreak or whatever, but when you're done, make that shit worse. So when the tough gets going for your MC, you want to add on, you want to pile on and make it worse. And this leads you to step number 4, the all is lost or the oh shit moment. Now this is basically where the character thinks they failed or is believed that they failed, but there is just a tiny sliver of hope, which of course leads to number 5, the climax and resolution. This is where your MC gets what they need, or maybe they don't get what they need, or maybe they get what they need and realize it was all bullshit, that they already had what they needed and it was right there within them the whole time. Or maybe they get what they needed and what they thought they needed wasn't really that important, and they have now discovered they have something more important than the thing they thought they needed. You get the idea. It basically resolves the story, it brings it back around full circle, but now your character is changed forever. They cannot go back to that mundane, boring bullshit lifestyle that we talked about in step number 1. Most of these are the so-called common beats to every story. These are typically a little bit easier to find in certain genres, specifically something like fantasy, where it's very clear what steps this particular main character is in the hero's journey, for example, if you chose that one, as opposed to, say, a contemporary romantic drama, where those things are all still there, just a little bit harder to define and see. Anyway, guys, you can click right over here for more writing advice videos, and you can click right over here for the Crimson Gods fantasy series, where I talk about the Crimson Gods. You can see the introduction, the prologue, all that good stuff as well. And if you dig what I do here, please give these videos a like, comment, and a share. And of course, be sure to subscribe to get everything and click that notification bell twice so you're notified when I drop a new video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.